Pittsburgh. He has, he's written some books on that. He's a professor on Pitt. Freddie Fu, who just got one of the Dapper Dan Awards this week, will speak here in June. But I want to alert you that it's going to be the first week in June, not the second, because of his schedule. And that's always hard to get the news out to people, but you've been warned that it's the first Tuesday instead of the second in June. For the rest of the material, you can get it there. Before I turn the program over to Helen Wilson, I want to show you something that we got tonight. What is, do you know, if you can see this, do you know what this is?
It's a church of Presbyterians.
That's, you think it's a picture of the Presbyterian church? No, it's the church that isn't.
The one where the library is.
It's across the street from the Presbyterian church, where the library is now. And Mel Berkowitz, one of our oldest members, not old in age, but oldest, the most loyal member, has given this to our budding archive. We have an archive. We have 3 flat books and a whole bunch of other stuff. One day we will figure out what to do. We tried to get the library to set up a Squirrel Hill section in which we could do this, but the Carnegie Library downtown has a policy right now that they want all the historic stuff to be done in the Pennsylvania room in downtown, and we're not ready to give our archives up to Oakland yet. So we haven't figured out what to do, but this is a new addition, and we thank you for it. We thought it'd be fun for you to see this. Most of us have never seen this church since it was long gone, since we came here. Before tonight's speaker, very interesting topic. Helen Wilson, our vice president, is going to come up and introduce the speaker. I just want to say that if you look at this schedule that's coming up of our speakers, of the next 7 or 8, I only found 4 of them. And Helen Wilson found 3 of them. And Helen's been doing a great job of finding speakers for us, so she has an announcement to make. We'll introduce the speaker and we'll run the program tonight, and I get to sit back and watch. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, you sure?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Before we begin, I just wanted to announce, a lot of you know that I researched Mary Brown Church and Turner Graveyard, and Mary Brown Church, in spite of being United Methodist from way back, is also has Ukrainian Easter egg ties, and there is a postcard in the back there on the table. Their egg show is, I should know this because I've been helping make eggs, minor disaster, but there's some real experts there. The eggs they're as beautiful as any eggs you can see anywhere. So Sunday, March 24th, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. So pick up the postcard, and it's a fundraiser for the church, and you know the church really needs it. So it's a beautiful, beautiful church in terrible condition. So yes.
I forgot to say, we have a problem with our speaker system tonight. It has to go to the hospital. So if you're not hearing the speakers, raise your hand and tell them, okay?
Okay, I don't know if Becky's handed me this, if you want to help clean up Carnegie Library, Forbes and Murray on Sunday, April 22nd. These flyers are also on the table, and Vicki has some as well. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Before we begin, I have to say that I went to an art class, and sitting next to me was Jeff's mother, who's in the back, Mary Ellen, and we became friends. And she lives down in beautiful Somerset, and she told me about this endeavor that Jeff and his brother Eric and the whole family, Mark is here somewhere, her husband, and Mary Ellen, are putting together Wiggle Whiskey, which is the first distillery in Pittsburgh since Prohibition. And Jeff the resident archaeologist, is in charge of the Whiskey Rebellion Museum. He does that half the year. The other half year, he is a park ranger at Mesa Verde National Park. And I guess the stories he could tell. He also has worked as a park ranger in Fort Necessity and libraries, churches. He has an academic background in archaeology, ancient history, the ancient Greek language, University of Pittsburgh, and the Indiana University of Pennsylvania, all of which are important to wiggle whiskey. So anyway, here is Jeff to speak about
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm Jeff, and we're going to talk about the whiskey insurrection tonight. It was called the insurrection, the whiskey insurrection, in the 1790s when it happened. Today we call it the Whiskey Rebellion, but at the time they called it the Whiskey Insurrection. We're going to talk about the people of Western Pennsylvania at the time, in the late 1700s. We'll talk about the culture, and we're also going to talk about the Pittsburgh Gazette. What's great about the history of the Whiskey Rebellion is that the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was around in 1794, and so we have voices of Pittsburgh from the time of the Whiskey Rebellion. And so we're going to actually, I'm going to be reading from some of those, and we'll discuss some of those primary sources tonight. So we can go to the next slide.
Do you need more light? Will you need more light up there?
I think I'm fine.
You're okay?
Oh yeah, can I move to the side?
Yeah. That's great. This lady will be.
Excellent. Can everybody see?
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah. The Whiskey Rebellion, in a nutshell, is 2 decades after the Revolution. So the Revolution is in the 1770s. The Whiskey Rebellion is in the 1790s. There's another dispute over taxes again. So you can go to the next slide. This time, however, the tax controversy isn't over tea, it's over a whiskey. So think about this. We have another tax on another popular drink that has got a lot of people angry. And it's going to potentially lead to another revolution. So you can go to the next slide. Okay. This area in purple is called West Sylvania after the American Revolution. So in the late 1700s, when the United States is brand new, this area west of the Appalachian Mountains, so here's the Appalachian Mountains here, just west is called West Sylvania. And West Sylvania is composed of people from Great Britain, composed of Scotch-Irish people, and the Scotch-Irish have brought their love of whiskey to Western Pennsylvania. They've also brought their hatred of tax collectors to Western Pennsylvania. There's an old motto from Britain that you need a tax in order to support a standing army, and you need a standing army in order to enforce the tax. And so that idea is going to be here in Western Pennsylvania. Also, people in Western Pennsylvania, many of them are veterans of the American Revolution. So many of the Scotch-Irish people out here, the people of English heritage out here, are used to standing up to a larger force. They're used to this revolutionary spirit. So keep that in mind as we talk about the Whiskey Rebellion. You're going to notice a lot of parallels and a lot of similarities between the American Revolution and the Whiskey Rebellion. Next slide. We have a cast of characters. In red here is the state. George Washington is the President of the United States in the 1790s at the time of the Whiskey Rebellion. So this shows you how early in American history this is happening. The first president, George Washington, is the president. Thomas Mifflin, he must be the namesake for West Mifflin, is the governor of Pennsylvania. General John Neville is the inspector of the revenue. He's the tax man. He's out here in Western Pennsylvania. He has a mansion on Bower Hill near Pittsburgh. Benjamin Wells is a tax collector that's going to have a run-in with some of the whiskey men. Alexander Addison is a judge out here in western Pennsylvania that is going to speak very eloquently and beautifully about people being peaceful and not jumping to arms. Brackenridge, H.H. Brackenridge, is a delegate from western Pennsylvania. He too is going to speak very beautifully and eloquently about peace and trying to bring people together as opposed to having another revolution. In blue, we have the insurgents. David Bradford is the rabble-rouser-in-chief. He is going to openly advocate for civil war, secession from the Union, that western Pennsylvania should be its own country. J.R. Distiller is an anonymous distiller that appears in the Pittsburgh Gazette to egg on the tax man. Tom the Tinker is another anonymous threat maker that appears in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll see him later on. Captain Whiskey is another anonymous man that appears in the literature. So you can see that there's a pattern here. There's a lot of anonymity and a lot of anonymous threats being made by certain radical elements in western Pennsylvania against the taxman. And there's Beelzebub, who's a disguised insurgent who comes to your house in the middle of the night. And then there's the counties of Washington, Westmoreland, Fayette, and Allegheny counties. These are the angry masses. And this is going to be the heart of the Whiskey Rebellion. So Pittsburgh is the heart of the Whiskey Rebellion. So next slide. Okay, well, we're first going to talk a little bit about American culture in 1794, culture in western Pennsylvania, and then we'll jump into the primary documents and the Pittsburgh Gazette. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is a wonderful painter named John Louis Krimmel, and he's a German Pennsylvanian. And this painting, called The Village Tavern, is from 2 decades after the Whiskey Rebellion. But it's from the same general time period. It's from the early American Republic. And in this painting, we're seeing ordinary folks at a tavern. You can see them, they're drinking. But at the same time, a tavern, this tavern drinking culture isn't just a place where people come to a tavern and get drunk. People aren't just going to a tavern for the sake of getting drunk. There's a man right here who's coming to the door. He's the postman. And in his bag right there is a stash of newspapers. He's bringing the newspaper. There's a young man right here who's turning away from his newspaper, but he's reading the newspaper. There's a man over here who is probably reading the newspaper out loud to this man. We can see that there looks like a political argument between these men. So we're seeing that taverns and drinking and reading the newspaper all kind of go together. That people in the United States are literate at the time of the early American Republic. The radical ideas of Thomas Jefferson is spreading. The idea that people should be literate, people should know what's going on in their communities, they should know what's going on in their country, they should know what's going on in the world. So even way out west here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is close to the frontier, the city of Pittsburgh, or the village of Pittsburgh, as it were, has a newspaper, and people are participating in the newspaper. So next slide. Okay, this is called pearlware. This would have been very common in the 1790s. This is what people would have had on their plate, on their tables. This is, you can see there's an English tea cup right here. People would have, in addition to whiskey, they would have also been participating in this English tea culture. And you see this blue rim around the plate. That's called a shell-edged plate. And that was a standard motif at this time. This was a very popular material to have at this time. Next slide. Everybody has what's called redwear. And redwear is used for everyday domestic, utilitarian needs. This might be a milk pan right here. You're milking the cow. This right here might be where you're storing grains. Every person has these materials. So in the late 1700s, there's this revolution of material goods. People are getting access to materials that in previous centuries they may not necessarily have access to. So there's a lot of things happening in America. There's this new Constitution. There's these new Bill of Rights. There's capitalism. People are buying things. People are making things. People are manufacturing and mass producing things. Next slide. Some of you might have something that looks a lot like this in your kitchen, in your garage, in your house, in your garden. This is a stoneware crock pot that would have been very common in America at the time, in the late 1700s. A person like Philip Wiggle, who we named the Wiggle whiskey after, he's a German Pennsylvanian, and Germans would have had crock pots like this. This would have been very typical. Next slide. This is a wonderful painting from 1806, just 10 years after the Whiskey Rebellion. It's by a painter named George Beck, and it's Pittsburgh in 1806. So you can see here's the point, and this big mound right here. That's old Fort Pitt. Fort Pitt had been dismantled by this time. There was now Fort Fayette in Pittsburgh. And you can see what looks like a big steeple. That's actually the courthouse. This big hill is called Grant Hill, and it was engineered away. It was cut away in the 1800s and the 1900s. So next slide. Okay, let's get to the Whiskey Rebellion. Whenever we're going to start to look at the primary documents, and as I read some of the primary documents, we'll discuss them, and I'll also have some paintings up. I think paintings are very important. We take them for granted. A painting from a time before cameras is critically important. Look at a painting as if it is a photograph from a time before photographs existed. It shows you what people have, it shows you how they're dressed, how they have their hair, the materials that they have, what people are doing. If you look at a painting, you can see it as any, it's a primary document. It's an artifact from that time period. So next slide. Thank you. Okay, this is actually an image from 1774, from the American Revolution, but you're going to see that it's very relevant to the events that are happening in western Pennsylvania 20 years later. Now, the first document that I have is a letter from a man named Dorsey Pentecost. It's from 1786. So the American Revolution has just ended. The Constitution doesn't even exist yet. The United States is working under the Articles of Confederation. That's how young the country is. But Dorsey, who is living in Washington County, is going to write a letter to some authorities, and he's going to say, "Gentlemen, about 10 days ago, a Mr. Graham, excise officer for the 3 western counties of Pennsylvania, was in the exercise of his office in this county. He was seized by a number of people and treated in the following manner. His pistols, which he carried before him, were taken and broke to pieces in his presence. His commission and all his papers relating to his office were torn and thrown into the mud, and he was forced to stamp on them. And he was forced to imprecate curses on himself, the commission, and the authority that gave it to him. They then cut off one half of his hair, queued the other half on one side of his head, cut off the cock of his hat, and made him wear it in a form to render his queue the most conspicuous. This, with many other marks of ignominy, they imposed on him, and to which we will be obliged to submit, and in the above plight they marched him amidst a crowd from the frontiers of this county to Westmoreland County, calling it all the still houses in their way, where they were treated greatest, and exposed him to every insult and mockery that their invention could contrive. They set him at liberty at the entrance of Westmoreland, but with threats of utter dissolution should he dare to return to this county." So in 1786, right after the American Revolution, we're seeing what looks just like the Stamp Act, just like the Boston Tea Party, happening all over again. Taxmen are being attacked in western Pennsylvania. Now when this Mr. Graham, this tax man, gets to Westmoreland County, he's going to stay overnight at a tavern, and he's going to hear a knock in the middle of the night. He'll open his door, and there will be a large, disguised figure at the door that calls himself Beelzebub, and he says his minions are waiting outside for him. Now Mr. Graham is able to escape, but you can see that it's easy to, from an abstract, distant point of view, to get caught up in this sort of revolutionary fever. It's easy to hate the tax man, but when you go to a human level and you see what's actually happening to a person who's just trying to do his job, you see how messy it really is. Next slide. All right, our first image from, our first document from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is from 1793, and it's a wanted ad. There's a distillery called Wingfield Mills, and the distiller is putting a wanted ad in the newspaper for employment, for help at the distillery. And he says, "These works are constructed and finished in the best manner. The mill runs 2 pair of stones, one of which is burr, with 2 water wheels, and a sawmill, all under cover of one roof. It is situated 10 miles from Pittsburgh, in the heart of a wheat country, and is capable of manufacturing 20 barrels of superfine flour every 24 hours, independent of country work, of which there is abundance. In the driest summer, winter is never wanted for one wheel, nor does the severest winter affect her. The distiller is situated about 100 yards from the mills, at the head of a never-failing stream of excellent water, containing 2 stills of 84 and 140 gallons, capable of running 20 gallons daily. The house is 28 feet square and is strongly built and conveniently constructed. The stills and vessels are new, and the situation of the works handsome, and without a rival in the western country. Apply to the subscriber at the mills." So we see that whiskey is just an everyday part of life in western Pennsylvania. People are putting ads in the newspaper, people are putting wanted ads in the newspaper. But something else that's important about something like this primary document, it seems kind of inconspicuous, but if you read between the details, you can really begin to reimagine western Pennsylvania 200 years ago. So in your mind's eye, he talks about having 2 water wheels. Now this is on Chartiers Creek near Pittsburgh. Imagine the streams of western Pennsylvania with water wheels in them. And he talks about how the mills are being powered by water power. He also talks about we're in the heart of wheat country. So in your mind's eye, fill the landscape with wheat fields, even if we're just a few miles from Pittsburgh. So something that's as simple as a wanted ad, if you read between the lines, you can really begin to fill in that historical landscape. Next slide. Okay. This is great. This is from western Pennsylvania here. This says, "An excise man carrying off 2 kegs of whiskey is pursued by 2 farmers intending to tar and feather him." That's what it says. And you can see the 2 farmers up here chasing after the tax man, and here's the devil with a hook about to get him. So, in 1793, the United States, the brand new United States government, is going to try again to have a tax on whiskey. They've had multiple attempts to have a successful tax on whiskey. They've all been complete failures. They're going to try again. And the Pittsburgh Gazette is going to publish the law. And the law is going to take up the entire front page of the newspaper. And you know, the font size was really small then with the block print, and it's a very detailed law. It's filled with a lot of legalese, lawyerese. It's hard to understand. I'm going to read just a few sentences of it for you. "Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, the present duties upon spirits distilled within the United States shall be paid the duties following, that is to say, for every gallon of those spirits of the first class of proof, 10 cents. For every gallon of those spirits of the second class of proof, 11 cents. For every gallon of those spirits of the third class of proof, 12 cents. For every gallon of those spirits of the fourth class of proof, 14 cents. And on the tax law goes. So you can change the slide.
Excuse me, can you talk about the noose, the guy hanging up there?
Yes, this is actually a very threatening illustration. They're threatening to hang the taxman.
Okay.
So the natural, the progress of this story, it's actually a full story. He's running from the taxman. The devil's going to hook him in, and then they're going to hang him. Yeah. Yes. Oh, this is not necessarily a specific taxman. This is a taxman in general, and they're just talking about what they would like to do with the taxman. Yes. Yeah.
Is there significance between the size of the taxman and the other people? He's so
Good.
much bigger than.
Yeah, he is. He is. The question was about the size between the taxman and the farmers. I think it's just to point him out. It's just to put him front and center. He's the center. As it says right here, an excise man. That's a tax man. And so they put him really big so that you know who's the tax man.
My first thought was that he has all the power and four people.
Exactly.
Peek around the corner.
And that could be it. Yes, and he is the powerful one, so he's the big one. Very good. Very good. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, it's not going to take very long after this tax is passed for trouble, excuse the pun, to brew in Western Pennsylvania. The federal government is going to find out about what's happening to its tax collectors in Western Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia, which is the capital then, is going to respond. They're going to write a proclamation that will appear in the Pittsburgh Gazette in early 1794. And that proclamation from the federal government reads, "Whereas, by information given on oath, it appears that in the night time of the 22nd day of November, a number of armed men, having their faces blackened and being otherwise disguised, violently broke open and entered the dwelling house of Benjamin Wells, collector of the revenue arising from spirits distilled within the United States, in and for the counties of Westmoreland and Fayette, in the District of Pennsylvania, and by assaulting the said collector and putting him in fear and danger of his life in his dwelling house aforesaid, in the said county of Fayette, did compel him to deliver up to them his commission for collecting the said revenue, together with the books kept by him in the execution of his duty, and did threaten to do further violence to the said collector, if he did not shortly thereafter publicly renounce the further execution of his said office. And whereas several of the perpetrators of the said offense are still unknown, and the safety and good order of society require that such daring offenders should be discovered and brought to justice, so that infractions of the law may be prevented, obedience to them secured, and officers protected in that execution of the trusts reposed in them. Therefore I have thought proper to offer, and hereby do offer, a reward of $200 for each of the said offenders that shall be discovered and brought to justice for the said offense, to be paid to the person or persons who shall first discover and give information of the said offenders to any judge, justice of the peace, or other magistrate. And I hereby strictly charge and enjoin all officers and ministers of justice, according as their respective duties may require, to use their best endeavors to cause the offenders to be discovered, apprehended, and secured, so that they may speedily be brought to trial for the offense aforesaid." Signed, George Washington. George Washington must be gritting his teeth. He's now an old man in the 1794. Exactly 40 years earlier, he was a 21-year-old kid building Fort Necessity in Fayette County, and he ran into a lot of trouble in Western Pennsylvania. And now at the end of his life, Western Pennsylvania is again giving him trouble. And but by early 1794, the federal government knows that trouble is occurring in Western Pennsylvania, and they're going to do something about it. Next slide, thanks. It doesn't take very long for violence to break out. John Neville's house, which is a mansion on Bower Hill on Charters Creek, is going to be attacked. Mobs of men are going to assemble they're armed, they have muskets. There's going to be shots fired, a couple people are going to die, and the mansion is going to be burned down. So violence has officially broken out. So John Neville, the head tax man in western Pennsylvania, has his home destroyed by whiskey rebels. And he puts a notice in the paper. In my house at Bower Hill on Charters Creek, which was attacked, plundered, and burnt by the rioters on Thursday evening last, were $4,611.60, funded debt of the United States, in my own name and 2 certificates. If they are fallen into the hands of an honest man, he can return them to Colonel Presley Neville in Pittsburgh. So the house was destroyed and a lot of money was stolen. Next slide. Thanks. Now, by the summer, after this event has happened, the rhetoric that's appearing in the newspaper is getting more and more radical on both sides. And the insurgents, the rebels, are going to be placing anonymous works in the Pittsburgh paper, some with threatening notices to them. You'll print this or else. And one of the works that appears in the Pittsburgh Gazette in August of 1794 is by a man who calls himself Captain Whiskey. And it's a satirical work. It's playful and it's cute, but beneath the playfulness and the cuteness is something very radical. He's basically calling the rebels to arms. And this satirical piece is called An Indian Treaty. And he's going to dress up the rebels as Indians. And at this time in American history, the United States Army has been getting crushed by the Native Americans. The Native Americans have allied amongst themselves, and they are crushing the United States Army in battle after battle. And so this whiskey man who writes this piece is calling himself a Native American in order to basically call on the United States. And he writes, remember this is a satire, speeches intended to be spoken at a treaty now holding with the 6 United Nations of white Indians settled on the heads of Ohio at the town of Pittsburgh, the 20th of August, 1794, by the commissioners sent from Philadelphia for the purpose. Captain Whiskey spoke. Brothers, we say that our whiskey shall not be saddled with an unequal tax. But remember, brothers, if we have not a king at our head, we have that powerful monarch, Captain Whiskey, to command us. By the power of his influence and a love to his person, we are impelled to every great and heroic act. You know, brothers, Captain Whiskey has been a great warrior in all nations and in all armies. He is a descendant of that nation called Ireland. And to use his own phrase, he has peopled 3/4 of this Western world with his own hand. We, the 6 United Nations of white Indians, are principally his legitimate offspring. And those who are not have all imbibed his principles and passions, that is, a love of whiskey, and will therefore fight our battle to the last gasp. Brothers, you may not think to frighten us with the fine arranged lists of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, composed of your watermelon armies from the Jersey shores. They would cut a much better figure in warring with the crabs and oysters about the capes of Delaware. It is a common thing for Indians to fight your best armies as the proportion of 1 to 5. Therefore, we would not hesitate a moment to attack this army at the rate of 1 to 10. Our nations can, upon an emergency, produce 20,000 warriors. You may then calculate what your army ought to be. But I must not forget that I am making an Indian speech. I must therefore give a smack of my tongue. Tagoosh Gershi, very strong man me, Captain Whiskey. So Captain Whiskey, this is a satirical piece. It's meant to be playful, but beneath the playfulness is something very serious. He's saying, we Indians have defeated your armies when we're outnumbered 5 to 1. I dare you to come and fight us. And George Washington and Alexander Hamilton in Philadelphia are going to respond. They are going to begin to raise the largest army that's ever been raised in North America. It's larger than any army raised during the American Revolution. And they're going to crush this rebellion. Another rebellious piece appears in the Pittsburgh Gazette in September of 1794. This is when the United States Army is already organizing and making its way across Pennsylvania. The Army would have been taking what are now modern routes 30 and 40 across Pennsylvania. We talk about Pennsylvania roads being bad now. They would have been terrible then. These would have been muddy roads, filled with water. There would have been boulders. Imagine walking up the Appalachian Mountains on a muddy road if you don't have shoes on. But the Army is coming. In the Pittsburgh Gazette, a piece is going to appear in September of 1794 as this army is coming. And it's going to be addressed to a Mr. John Gaston. And it's going to say, to John Gaston, Sir, you will please have this printed in the Pittsburgh paper this week, or you may abide by the consequence. Poor Tom makes this opportunity to inform his friends throughout all the country that he is obliged to take up his commission once more, though disagreeable to his inclination. This is fair warning, traitors. Take care, for my hammer is up and my ladle is hot. I cannot travel the country for nothing. From your old friend, Tom the Tinker. Now, Tom the Tinker is a play on words. When you tinker something, you fix it. Tom is an anonymous person that is going to distilleries in western Pennsylvania. He is finding distillers who are actually obeying the law and paying taxes, and he tinkers their distilleries by breaking them. He breaks the machinery. And so he puts this message in the newspaper that if you are helping or aiding and abiding the United States, we will appear in the middle of the night and fix your distillery. Next slide. Okay. Now, amidst all of this radicalism, amidst all of this growing, this growing radicalism, we have voices of peace in western Pennsylvania. And one of them is a judge out here named Alexander Addison. And Alexander Addison is going to write very beautifully and very poetically, basically pleading the people of western Pennsylvania not to resort to arms. And he's going to give a speech to the grand jury of Allegheny County in September of 1794. And he is going to say, the alarming and awful situation of this country at this moment are too well known to require a statement. On the part of government, we are now offering a forgiveness of all that is past, on condition that we sincerely submit to the excise law and all other laws. The question now is whether we will accept of the terms proposed or not. The decision of this question is of such importance that I am sure it will receive a solemn consideration from every citizen of a sober mind. If we accept of the terms, we shall have peace. If we reject them, we shall have war. War is so dreadful a calamity that nothing can justify its admission, but an evil against which no other remedy remains. If we determine on war, look forward to the consequences. Either we shall defeat the United States, or the United States will subdue us. If the United States subdue us, we shall, at the end of the war, be certainly not in a better position than we are at present. In a state of open war, we shall be considered as any other enemy, with the additional rancor attached in a civil war. Our agriculture will be destroyed, our fields laid waste, our houses burnt, and while we are fighting our fellow citizens on one side, the Indians, and God knows how soon, will attack us on the other. The conscience of many among ourselves will shrink back with horror at the idea of drawing a sword against our brethren. And may the God of wisdom and peace inspire this people with discernment and virtue, remove from their minds blindness and passion, and have this country from becoming a field of blood. So Alexander Addison is telling people, we have a choice here. We can choose peace or we can choose war. It's your choice. If you choose war, be prepared for the consequences. George Washington isn't messing around. This army of 13,000 men that he's bringing here isn't messing around. They will burn down your fields. They will burn down your homes. Next slide. Thanks. Another voice for the sober-minded, as they would call it then, appears in October of 1794 from a meeting in Fayette County among delegates like H.H. Brackenridge and Albert Gallatin. And this testimony appears in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. They write, "We might expatiate on the improbability that such a small number as the inhabitants of the western country, unprepared as they are for such an event of civil war, having but a scanty supply of arms and ammunition, and with the Indians at their back, could succeed against the whole force of the Union. We might represent how ruinous at all events to this country a contest would be. Violence and resistance on your part would be the attempt of a minority to overrule and in fact to oppress the majority of the people of the United States. An attempt to destroy every principle of that constitutional and rational liberty which we now enjoy. This question which every man must answer is this: is the oppression arising from the excise law sufficient to justify me before my own conscience and my God in taking up arms against fellow citizens? Are the evils that will arise from the payment of that tax equal to those which a war must bring upon myself and upon my country?" This is a very sophisticated and eloquent argument. Is a tax worth taking a musket and pointing it at another human being? That's what they're arguing here in Fayette County. Next slide. Fortunately, George Washington and Alexander Hamilton in some ways are just as radical as the whiskey men. They are bent on crushing this rebellion that actually people like Albert Gallatin, people like H.H. Brackenridge had really, with their arguments, they'd sort of put a lid on the worst of it. And by bringing this army across the mountains, there was the real chance that this was going to reignite or rekindle this rebellious flame. But fortunately, when the United States Army arrives west of the Appalachian Mountains, they do not need an army. Instead, they march to Pittsburgh, they make some arrests, they arrest people who have been found to have done things that were illegal, and they're going to bring them back to Philadelphia to be tried. Now, for the people arrested, this was terrible. They were pulled out of their beds in the middle of the night, and they were forced to walk from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia on those horrible roads. A lot of them didn't have all their clothes on because they were awakened in the middle of the night. They didn't have shoes. So this was really a terrible ordeal. However, this could have been a lot worse. This really could have been the first Civil War if certain passions, if certain radical passions had sort of taken over. There could have been battle, but there wasn't. And George Washington, to his credit, is going to be the bigger person after a couple people are found treasonous, are found to have committed treason. Treason by the Constitution is subject to death. So if you're guilty of treason, you're a traitor, and you can be put to death by the Constitution. George Washington is going to pardon the two men who are guilty of treason. And it's his way of saying, let's let this unpleasantness pass and move forward. Let's have peace in our time. That's sort of what he's saying. And George Washington, this is the final document I have here. In early 1795, he's going to he's going to have a proclamation, and it's going to be printed in the Pittsburgh Gazette. And he's going to say, "When we review the calamities which afflict so many other nations, the present condition of the United States affords much matter of consolation and satisfaction. Our exception hitherto from foreign war, an increasing prospect of the continuance of that exception, the great degree of internal tranquility we have enjoyed, the recent confirmation of that tranquility by the suppression of an insurrection which so wantonly threatened it, the happy course of our public affairs in general, the unexampled prosperity of all classes of our citizens, are circumstances which peculiarly mark our situation with indications of divine beneficence towards us. In such a state of things it is, and in a special manner, our duty as a people, with devout reverence and affectionate gratitude, to acknowledge our many and great obligations to Almighty God, and to implore Him to continue and confirm the blessings we experience." So, Whiskey Rebellion, there has shots fired, people die. For many people, terrible things are done to them. People are dragged out of their homes. People are abused. But overall, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been something much worse. It does, and in the end, have a happy ending. I want to thank you very much for listening to me speak. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Well, did the tax continue after this, or did they change it, or did they make
Good.
accommodations?
Yes. What happens to the tax? The people in Western Pennsylvania are going to decide to submit to the laws. There are going to be eventually some amendments to it, but they agree to submit to parts of it. But it is going to be worked on and amended. Yes.
What was the primary grain used for the whiskey?
Primary grain. Well, especially among the distillers along the Monongahela country, the Monongahela River especially, is going to be rye. Now, one of the people that we read in here talks, one of the man we talked about in here says that his distillery is in the heart of wheat country. So probably wheat too. Yes. Yes.
I always thought that after the Whiskey Rebellion was suppressed, that the tax on whiskey was repealed.
Yeah, they're going to have to work on the whiskey law itself, but people in Western Pennsylvania have to sign a form, a submission to the law. Now, when people in Pennsylvania sign this form, sometimes they cross out things in the form that says, "I will submit to this and this," and they cross it out and then they sign it. So now what that means, we don't know, but yes, the federal government's going to have to respond and change the law. Yeah.
Do you know if Mr. Addison was a Quaker?
Was he a Quaker? Good question. Alexander Addison, the judge. That's a good question. I would assume that out here in 1794, with a name like Addison, maybe is that Scotch-Irish? Yeah, that he would be Calvinist. I would assume Presbyterian. And actually, what's interesting in the Pittsburgh Gazette is you see whole articles, because it was Scotch-Irish. There was a lot of Presbyterians out here. You do see articles on why Calvinism is a superior theology to other theologies.
Oh,
So it is really interesting to just read the paper from that time. Yeah.
Now, if we come to Wiggle Whiskey,
Yes.
is there the Whiskey Rebellion Museum? Is
The
that
Whiskey
set up? Or how-
Rebellion Museum is a work in progress right now, and the last few months I've returned from Colorado. I've been collecting as many primary resources as I had, and we're working with some artists to lay out some plans, so it's in the development stage right now. The major exhibit, though, at Wiggle Whiskey is the distillery itself. So yes, the actual machinery of the distillery. And in this time, in the late 1700s, people would have been making distillery in a copper still, and there would have been a lot of wooden barrels. Today we use a lot more metal than they would have used back at that time. But the still that we use is made out of copper, so that part is keeping in with the tradition. Yeah. Yes.
A couple of things. Did this tax come, the Constitution was adopted in 1890, I think it was 89.
Yeah, it just come through, like 88, yeah.
And was this one of the series of taxes that the federal government now passed, which was because they felt more empowered to do so?
Yeah, the federal government, okay, so there was a fundamental change in ideas between the original idea, which was the Articles of Confederation, which was every state is kind of like its own country, and then they're sort of linked together in this loose network. However, they found out that wasn't working too well, so they came up with the Constitution, where power is centered in Philadelphia in the capital. And the government had just fought this long war with Great Britain, so they didn't have any money. They needed to pay a tax, and there was a lot of reasons why they were going to pick whiskey to be taxed. And one of them was that a lot of people did it. There was a lot of people using whiskey and making whiskey, so we could make revenue on it. There was a moral argument. Probably shouldn't be drinking. It's better to drink tea than to drink whiskey, right, from a moral perspective. So you could have sort of like a moral tax on it. But this is a major tax, and there are rumors at the time that this tax on whiskey is going to expand to wheat and rye and anything else that you have on the farm. And so one of the ideas was that we just finished this revolution over taxes, and now we're being taxed not by London but by Philadelphia. So, but yeah, it's a major tax to create revenue for the federal government. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Oh, well, I just noticed the correlation between the Luddites. Wasn't that about the same time? Do you know about that?
Yeah, the Luddites.
Because the Ned Ludd and the
He was in Great
tinkerer.
Britain, right?
Yeah, they were busting up machinery because
Absolutely.
and the Tom the Tinkerer or the Tinkerer. What was his name?
Yes, Tom the Tinkerer. Yes.
That's
So
very similar.
yes, this actually is. We think of the Industrial Revolution as being the middle of the 19th century, with the machines and the factories. Industrial Revolution really begins 100 years earlier in the middle of the 1700s. And it's not smokestacks, it's not coal and combustion and those sort of combustion machines. It's the water power, it's the, and textiles.
Yeah, they were busting up.
Textile machines were beginning to, like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Textile machines were starting to take workers' jobs away in parts of Britain. And so this figure, Jacob Lude, he breaks the machinery for the textiles. So yes, this is because he lost his job. He had been a textile worker, he lost his job to a machine. And so yes, this is that time of this pre-industrial revolution. People that were once craftsmen are now beginning to have their jobs taken over by machines. That is the beginning.
Well, they don't really think that he was an actual person. Like, just like...
Yes, exactly.
He was anonymous and...
So it's a
printed in
pseudonym,
paper.
yeah, it's a pseudonym. Yes,
And
exactly.
it would be
So
related.
Tom the Tinkerer is kind of like that in that he's a pseudonym,
So they
yes.
would have brought that with them, that history.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, it's the same kind of idea, yep, yes.
Well, to reinforce that, a lot of people who came to America had memories of some kind of early industrial actions and just, they were ornery, we know that, and that was one of the reasons.
Exactly, yeah, without a doubt, yes. Yes,
Two things. First of all, I read where one of the reasons George Washington was so adamant about marching was because he owned so much property in Washington County. And the other question I have is, who exactly was Wiggle?
oh yes, I should have brought that up, yeah. So Philip Wiggle is a German who's come to Westmoreland County. He is going to punch out one of the tax collectors. And he's going to be dragged to Philadelphia. And he's one of the men that's found guilty of treason. And he was actually, they found him to be insane, but George Washington pardoned him. So he should have technically by the Constitution been hanged for being a traitor, but Washington let him go, so he was pardoned. And yes, Washington, there's a lot written about why Washington raises this large army to suppress this uprising in western Pennsylvania. Remember, after the American Revolution, the entire western part of the United States, west of the Appalachian Mountains, was in revolt. There's Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. There is an entire region of Carolina that has broken away and starting its own country in the western Carolinas. There's issues happening in western Virginia. But Washington seems to have this vendetta against western Pennsylvania for the history. He has.
It was easier to get to.
It was easier to get to because there are two major roads coming out here. Yes, yes. So this was sort of like his example to everybody else. Yeah. Yeah.
You might say one result of this was that by 1800, what you call the radical Thomas Jefferson won the election, and the Democrats were in power for the next 20 years.
Exactly, yes. We see very good point. We see the beginning of the first political parties. George Washington did not like political parties. He thought that they were dangerous to the federal government. The opposite of Washington are the anti-federalists, and this is Thomas Jefferson's party. This is the country people. They should be empowered to do things their way. They shouldn't be guided by what's happening in the capital. They shouldn't be guided by what's happening in the merchant classes. So we're seeing the development of two political parties. And so Jefferson does become the president after Washington. So yes, we're seeing at the beginning of the United States two different political philosophies develop. Yeah.
Most of the inhabitants in this area were Presbyterians,
A lot.
Scotch Irish.
Yes.
I always understood that they didn't believe in drinking, so why would they go into that trade, you know?
Excellent question. Yes. Presbyterians. Why are Presbyterians drinking whiskey? Right stereotype, wrong time. The idea that we shouldn't be drinking whiskey or we shouldn't be drinking alcohol, the temperance movement is a 19th century idea. In the 1700s, we're still close enough to the Middle Ages where everybody was at the inn, and the taverns and inns are a part of everyday life, that it wouldn't have been an issue. And remember, they're coming from Scotland, they're coming from...
So it wasn't a religious principle then?
It wasn't really. It's going to be, in the 19th century, it's going to become a religious principle. Yes. Any other questions? It's really great.
I missed how many people died and when?
Yes, a couple people are going to die on the attack on John Neville's house in July. There's going to be shots fired and 2 or 3 people die. And then when the United States Army comes out, a couple people will die in confrontations between the United States Army and the local inhabitants. When the Army would come out, they didn't necessarily have all the supplies that they needed. So if they came to your town and say they needed clothes, they needed food, they just go into your home and take them. And those were those kinds of issues. Now remember, this was September and November when they're coming out here. And if you're a farmer, that's when you're getting ready for winter. You have to have all your supplies ready for the long winter, and somebody comes and takes your food. You're going to have issues with the Army. And there are scuffles between the town people and the Army, and a couple people die there. And one of the men who was arrested by the Army, because the conditions were so appalling on the march back, he did die. So a handful of people died over this period between mid-July 1794 and when they're brought to Philadelphia in December. Yep. Now it could have been a lot worse. Yeah.
I want to thank your mother for befriending Miss Wilson, because I just hate to think that I would be deprived of all this education being presented here.
Oh, thanks. Oh, thank you very much.
The Pittsburgh Gazette,
Yes.
did the editors come out one way or the other?
They published whatever was put out. It was a very, newspapers were really this democratic force. It's kind of like the internet. It's whatever you wanted to put up, they would throw up. You have everything in the newspaper that you could possibly imagine. You have something radical about taxes. You have somebody writing about why Calvinism is better. You have somebody putting a message in the paper about their missing slave. Pennsylvania, John Neville, whose house was attacked, the tax collector, he had slaves here in western Pennsylvania. We think of the North as being free. It wasn't. We have, you can actually go through the census from 1794 and from 1800. You go through the census, they have a whole column for slaves. And you can count how many slaves there were in Allegheny County in 1794 or in 1800 when the census was done. Yeah? Yep. Yes?
It's ironic that now Pennsylvania has the most repressive taxes against the liquor industry in the nation.
Yeah.
That's all I'd like to point out.
Yeah. Yes. When you yes, I'll be going out to Colorado in a few weeks, and you just go to the grocery store and everything you want at the grocery store. Yes, so we are known for peculiar laws here in Pennsylvania regarding some of those. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I know Carnegie Library, the Pennsylvania room, has the microfiche.
Yes.
And it must have been such a chore, since they're not digitized, for you to go and find these things, but they're there if anybody wants to go and wade through them.
Absolutely. I got the Pennsylvania Gazette, or I'm sorry, the Pittsburgh Gazette on the 3rd floor of the Carnegie Library. It's on microfilm, and you just wheel through it. And there's something on every page that's just fascinating that will turn your ideas about the time upside down. Yeah.
And I want to add to that another program that Helen and I did together at Carnegie Library. One of the donor programs was to go back to the William Oliver room. I don't know if any of you've been to that room. You have to make an appointment to go there. But they have those rooms that it's not open to public, but if you make an appointment, if you have a library card, make an appointment. The room is kept at 68 degrees, so it has lots of old documents. It has illuminated manuscripts from the 1400s and different things. But also it has some of the original documents from the Whiskey Rebellion that are great. The Breckenridge and you know, where they list the estates and things like that. So it's another interesting stuff. And I just wanted to say, come visit us at Wiggle Whiskey at 24th and Smallman. Go on to www.wigglewhiskey.com.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to the audience as well for the great questions. This is a great interchange. I ran into the Whiskey Rebellion, funny place. There were some folks who were so unreconstructed that they left the area. And one of them was a guy named Bradford. And I was visiting some plantations for some work I was doing north of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And one of the leaders of the rebellion had somehow fled and had taken over and had redeveloped, probably with slaves, a Louisiana plantation about 40 miles from Baton Rouge. The whole plantation is the history of the Bradford, so it was interesting. Thank you, as usual, for coming. There are a few people in this audience who have been members who have not renewed. You will get a letter soon, but if you do it tonight, you can save us postage. So you know who you are. Any new people here who would like to join, we have applications back there. And we'll see you the second week of April to hear about black baseball in Pittsburgh. Have a good evening.